Assembly of Silence. Welcome to the Assembly of Silence Radio Hour.
Okay, folks, here we go. This is going to be a wild one. And fun. I'm introducing you to a ninja. And it's going to be pretty obvious from the conversation that this guy and I are friends. He's a good friend. I love this guy. I think you're going to love him too. Sit back, enjoy. I don't have much else to say about it except if you want to check out the video of this podcast, which is a great idea to do, by the way, it's worth it. Go to the Assembly of Silence YouTube channel, link in the show note description. If you would like to support these efforts, you know what to do. The two main things are, like, subscribe, blah, 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 all that stuff, right? Write a review on iTunes. And then there's Substack, taijireality.substack.com, TAIJIREALITY. Or, if you just want to go right in there and throw some money to me, patreon.com/taijireality. That's it. Enjoy the show.
No, I turned my lights off because it was really bright.
That's funny because I turned my heater off, and that's why the computer bombed.
Nice. And can you see Jesus up there?
Yeah, I can. I can see him.
Okay, good. Just want to make sure that he's
Yeah.
in the picture.
With what is that? A 3-pointer? 4-pointer?
I don't know. I don't know how to count the points. My buddy gave me some elk and said I could keep it in my shop. And I said, okay. And then I just stuck a velvet Jesus up there. And there it is.
You were telling me about last night.
So I ate a handful of mushrooms with a good friend of mine last night. And so the backstory is he works at Trillium. So it's like the children's farm home out on Highway 20. So he works with youth that essentially can't be put in prison, that have had really fucked up life situations. And then they're dealing with that. Some of them are violent. Some of them are suicidal. Some of them just are fucked. They're damaged goods. And because of his nature, he's a very strong, he's native blood. He's got an intense connection to source and to the earth. And he's a grounding rod for a lot of these kids. And so consequently, with the whole nature of COVID and where everybody's at right now, he's kind of like a fucking daddy, father figure, protector figure. And he's getting worn the fuck out, And so we needed some time just to have some dude time last night. And it just so happened I had a box of mushrooms. So we, I don't know, around probably 10 o'clock, just gobbled a handful and then went for a walk around the industrial park down below my property for a few hours and just had a great time. The thing that got really weird is when we came back up here in the peak of our experience, I get a text from one of he's a good friend, but he was a student of mine in my martial arts school. He literally said, my wife died last night and I'm looking to basically get back out and see the guys and hang with people that I know right now. And then that was the end of the day. He's like, I'm just looking forward to seeing you guys. I'm like, what in the fuck? So here we are frying balls. And then I get a real message from a real fucking person that says his wife died last night. I know nothing around the specifics or anything. We were spun. So I tried calling him just to touch base, find out. He didn't answer his phone. He hasn't answered any text. And I'm just like, what in the absolute fuck is going on? Mm-hmm. So anyway, I just woke up and, it's because we stayed up late, but
Okay. We're going to pause the recording then.
So I don't know if you've heard any of that.
No, I didn't.
So I apologize for that. So James just called me in that moment. So that's how spirit works. Yep. Holy shit. So I told him I would call him as soon as I was done with this because I said I was in the middle of talking about him. So life works out. I don't know what my train of thought was before that, but so 2020 showed me one thing, and that is nobody's getting out of here alive, and I'm okay with that. And I think that's the problem that people are not able to reconcile right now, is that nobody's getting out of here alive. And so what is being used against the human mind right now, whether we know it or not, or whether we mean to do it or not, is we're all facing death as a is an absolute species, and it's freaking us the fuck out. And you're gonna either pick stay scared road, or you're gonna become a real human and just admit that you don't have control over anything and get on with your life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's what I feel 20 has done for me, is like, get on with your life, you know?
Absolutely.
Fuck.
Yeah, it's fascinating too, because there's a huge thread where a lot of people are thinking that they're going to live forever in cyberspace, and the sort of transhumanist sense of immortality that, I want to live forever. What was that song in the 70s or something that, really is kind of a banner concept in the,
Fame.
let's say, yeah, I guess it was Fame, right? So it seems like that idea really grasped the balls of a lot of people. And there's a guy who developed a theory about human nature that says that basically the whole thing is built on the denial of death. And I don't know whether or not that would have been the case in the past. I really don't think it was. I think that the indigenous people fully understood that, at least as far as this particular body, this particular life is concerned, it's a limited lease. But it seems like, the so-called modern man seems to have forgotten that most basic of facts, or at least is trying to push it out of their thought process as much as possible. And the consequences are freaking horrible. But on the other hand, it is sort of what keeps the play going. It's like the little lie that, well, the big lie that that prevents the whole thing from crumbling. So it's dangerous stuff, I guess you could say.
You know, I think the underlying phenomenon, and this is something I've been thinking a lot about for a lot of years, especially in my study of, where are we, like actually physically, where are we in relationship to Earth and potentially heaven, right? To actually spatially orient myself to those two realities has really made me come down to this one common denominator. And it's pretty crass, but it's essentially men and women basically can't stop fucking. And so we just keep making babies and keep promulgating this thing, right? Like at any point, any indigenous person could say, yeah, we're not going to make any kids. We're going to be the last ones in this tribe. Fuck it. We're going out hard. And they quit fucking, they quit making babies, and then they all die old spirit warriors. No, nobody does that shit. Everybody keeps making babies and struggling their ass off and trying to get food and trying to keep warm. And then while we get comfortable, we start making more babies again. It's like, I think that there's a real it's a bio-spiritual drive to make babies. No matter, even if you're transgender or gay and you can't make babies, your two women are not going to produce a child in nature, right? But they still want a baby if they want a baby. So it comes down to that. And so for some reason, I think when we make babies, it kind of gives us that, it takes the edge off of us thinking we're going to die or remembering we're going to die. And so then we get to an age where we're like, fuck, I'm going to die. We got to make some babies. We need some grandbabies running around here. Like, that makes you feel like you live on, I think.
Yeah.
And I think Idiocracy actually nailed it when they said the dumb people are outbreeding the intelligent people. And that's pretty much the source of all of our problems.
Well, it seems like there's some shift in some part of the population now, because we have this thing like in Japan, for instance, where there's a lot of younger folks who just don't want to have kids anymore. It's become kind of a real thing over there. And I think we're starting to see a little bit of that happening here too. Maybe to some extent that explains the whole transhumanist dream of being able to live forever in cyberspace. They kind of like transplanted their dreams of immortality from having children to being able to just continue in the virtual space, I guess. But, there are some other instances of this kind of thing. I think it is true that a number of native groups decided, okay, we're done. Like, this is it. And I think there's some groups from the West too. You had the Shakers, I believe, were a group that decided, okay, no more kids, I don't know of any others, but I think that was one of their things. So clearly it's something that people have been struggling with for a long time. And it does seem like that might be a way of characterizing one of the big pivots going on right now. Because my sense is like, kind of one of the main things that one of the real reasons I'm continuing to do this is there's a set of ideas that I think are worth articulating. And one of them has to do with this idea that a species is kind of characterized by its number of nodes in relation to the world that it's in. So we're kind of getting to the point where the social insects were, where the population density is such that there's going to be, increased pressure to not have so many kids. And I think we're starting to see that in some of the stuff that's going on within the woke world, you could say. So it starts to make sense that you would have a species that converts from everyone having the capacity to reproduce to only a few, or maybe it would become more of a mechanical process, which is, from my point of view, a freaking nightmare. But that doesn't mean that it's totally unnatural and without precedence. It just changes the whole landscape of what being human is.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot to consider. It's interesting. Whenever you talk, you always can take me, like, I can go visually where you're talking, even though it may have, my visualization may have nothing to do with what you're saying. But what I saw there was kind of like that out of the ashes sort of a thing, where we literally will kind of, by the natural cycle, and it may not look the way I want it to look, but we're going to have a natural cycle of decreased population growth. I don't think, and I'm an outlier all the time with everything I think, but I don't think we have too many people in the world. I think that we're just approaching the way we live here really in a very weak sense. We're not honoring the place. We're not looking towards abundance. We're always looking towards scarcity. And part of that's something we've been sold, but it's also this kind of, again, that fear of death. I was like, there's not going to be enough. So then we run around with mice over consuming, knowing there won't be enough in the future. So fuck it, let's just party now, kind of a thing. But I do see it's just, I think there's nothing new under the sun. We're going to ebb and flow. You know what I mean? And there's going to be ups and downs. And right now, like you said, it's a pivot. We are literally experiencing the biggest pivot I've ever seen in my life, where people are going to have to make a choice how they want to move forward. And it has to be silent. It can't be outward, because otherwise people put you in a camp. Like I am, like I said, as an outlier, I'm, somebody that refuses to get vaccinated. I will not vaccinate my children. And we live in a world right now where it's kind of becoming, they want it to be a popular, cool thing to do, to get vaccinated, regardless of what side anybody stands on with vaccinations or their understanding of them. You have to wonder why they're pushing it so hard into the minds of people that you should do this, because you're a bad person if you don't, and you're a good person if you do. And how are we going to convince those non-science minded people that don't believe what they're told? It's like, when you actually think for yourself and you realize you are an autonomous spiritual being, you can make your own choice. For some reason, that's a threat to people right now.
All of that folds in perfectly with the idea that the characteristic of the species changes depending on the number of nodes. It's like kind of a question of, well, are there too many human beings? Well, too many for what? Too many for what kind of way of living? And it may be that, it's like, we can support the population we have going on right now, but are we going to be able to have a classical liberal, democracy? Maybe not. I mean, we've been struggling with systems that we have for quite a while. We all know that there's all kinds of problems with them. And, the Chinese model, which keeps on coming up, it's a nightmare, but it kind of addresses a number of the major points. So, one of the things that you read in the Taoist texts is, particularly if you're reading like the strategy of Art of War, that type of thing, the coherency within a group of people determines the degree to which they have a robust ability to assert themselves, whether militarily or culturally or what have you. So the problem with liberalism on a basic level is that it doesn't necessarily have any kind of group-wide coherency. And when you get a lot of people involved, then the arguments and the problems become ever more an obstacle to getting shit done. And you could say on some level that that's precisely what's been happening in our democracy. Like, we basically have gridlock because no one can agree on shit.
Everybody's got feelings.
Everyone has feelings, right? Some people have thoughts too.
And
Yeah. Everyone has feelings. That's for sure. And some people have thoughts.
Yeah.
And it's one big mess.
Some of them.
Yeah. So yeah, it's like at a certain point, the hammer comes down, you know, the people who have the greatest ability to assert their way of going about doing things, say, fuck it, we need to get something lined up here so that we have a functional system. And, you know, their idea of functional may not be our idea of functional. And another side of this thing too is that, you know, typically all this kind of thing happens during a major crisis, a crisis on a kind of global environmental level. And so it may be that there's a, you know, a thread of humanity that goes one way and another, let's say, remnant that goes a different way. So it's not entirely clear that we are all going to go the same way, although there's probably going to be efforts to make it go that way. They want everyone to get vaccinated, like you're saying, you know?
Well, yeah. And I mean, you start thinking about that. What you're talking about, the coherency, what I see is that it's like the order out of chaos thing, right? That's just a normal cycle of every moment of our existence. And so the power players in this world who are very weak, feeble people, they assert power through the belief that others around them have in their power. Nobody has any power to control people. They present an idea, whether that's the media, whether it's a government, whether it's a bankster, it doesn't matter. An idea is presented, it gets seeded, and it gets basically fertilized, and they live off of it until we quit eating it. So for instance, you and I have talked about money, okay? So money's the big one right now because nobody's talking about it. Everyone wants to talk about the politics. Are you red? Are you blue? Who'd you vote for? You know, if you think that, then you're this and all this dumb stuff. But nobody's talking about the actual issue, which is energy. In order to motivate somebody to do something for somebody else that will benefit both parties, we've all agreed we need some sort of exchange for that, because we're still acting like children and don't realize that the real world doesn't need fake fiat currency to trade around. We can actually just interact as human beings and figure it out. But we're taught that no, you can't do that. You have to use this thing that somebody said is real. And oh, by the way, that's literally going to make you, it's going to incentivize you to make all the choices in your life, and you're going to have no idea why you're actually doing it. And then when you wake up and realize, oh, this is meaningless, it's too late. You're in the matrix. You have to pay your bills. You pretty much want to drink clean, right? You're going to have to go somewhere where there's clean fucking water. And that today costs like $2.25 a bottle. You know, so we live in this world that's been constructed around us. And even if we want to liberate ourselves from it, we're in it. Like, you live out in the country and you still have to make a living, you know? I mean, this is how it's worked. We were set up into a system that is non-real, but it's got real consequences. And so people who are attuned on any kind of level of love, we know it's not right and we can't do anything about it. So our lot in life is to get good with it the best that we can, try to liberate ourselves the best moral, legal, and ethical way we can, and not put in my case, I have children. If I go off grid and go live as a hermit somewhere in the woods and pull them out of school, I might be doing them a massive disservice for the rest of their life, because this is the system that they're in.
Yeah.
So I've opted to try and teach them how to thrive within this bullshit system, but I call it bullshit right to their face all the time. I say, I know this doesn't make any sense. I know you don't like this, but walk like a duck, squawk like a duck until you can get to the place where you can liberate yourself legitimately, but don't pretend that it doesn't exist, because I fought the system forever and it didn't serve me very well.
Right.
So you have to basically mesh in, like Sun Tzu says, or actually Masashi said, to soak in, right? You have to become what it is that you have a disdain for, like this material world we live in. I'm very spiritually minded. I live way more in that realm, and in a place of all the intangibles and unprovables, the gut level stuff. That's where I live. And I've gotten phenomenal results in my life with interactions with other people living there. When I live more in the material realm, I don't get the same results.
Yep.
There's always some balancing act. It's like it's almost like there's an interesting corollary. Let's say you save up money because you want to get something, you know, like a newer car, because your car you're in every day has a bad defrost, the brakes are shitty, the door won't close on the first close, you got to slam it twice. So you're like, well, I want to get a newer rig, not even a brand new car, just a newer rig. So you're like, well, I need a few grand to go get this one that's down the road, and it's going to be a much better rig for me. So then you take out a small loan or you work out a payment plan with this person. Well, that's just for a car. We don't realize how much our lives are wrapped up into these little things that we need to spend money on, legitimately, rightfully so. But we live unconscious lives because of that demand everywhere around us all the time.
Yeah.
This phone that I'm looking at you on, I think it was $800. And so we decided to pay for it over monthly installments. Well, almost everybody's got one of these fuckers in their pocket right now. Think about that. And we're slaves upon slaves upon slaves upon ideas of slaves. So at some point, you just have to just say, hey, it is what it fucking is. Put your energy somewhere and try to make the world a better place in your little corner of the world. That's all I got at this point. Like, I went with. Go ahead.
There's a long history of various forms of enslavement, and I wonder often, like, the extent to which the average human experience has been one that's been of freedom. It seems unlikely. Like, even in small groups, I imagine that probably there were those characters who dominated the scene and who enforced their way, and that if you weren't one of those people, you were living under that kind of, let's say, coercion. And if you were one of those people, you were living in constant fear of being overturned, kind of like the way it works with some of the other primates. And so, it's probably the case that this is the situation that we've always been dealing with. And I agree 100% that redemption is found within the spiritual domain, because the material world ain't never going to be ideal. So the best we can do is to find peace within us and come to terms with the reality of the situation that we're in. I'm not really sure that on one hand, I agree with you that the people in power are not powerful, but that's just on a personal level, because, the fact of the matter is that they can do terrible things to people. And that's sort of what power is. And so, fundamentally, they may be also kind of enslaved to their position in the same way that we are. Nevertheless, if they're going to fulfill the role of that office, let's say, they're going to be coming down hard on people when they need to, because that's what the office entails. So, we are up against something that's formidable, and for which there's no real, like, particularly in a world like today where the disparity is so great, the technology is so highly developed and so ruthlessly destructive when it needs to be. The idea that, there's going to be some sort of a revolution or something like that, I find, absurd, really. I mean, if there's going to be a revolution, it's going to be because they want one. That's the only revolution that's going to happen now.
Well, it'll be a televised revolution. It's like the storming of the Capitol. If you watch those videos and don't take stock for one moment that somebody videotaped that for your entertainment, like, there was a cameraman taking great shots the whole time, documenting everything. It's like, you know what that means? That means it's bullshit. That's how life works. I'm sorry, but organic events where there are, career altering for a country don't get televised perfectly and then broadcast on schedule. I'm sorry. That's not how shit works. And
well, on the other hand, everyone is walking around with a little camera in their pocket. So, but yeah, I agree. And I think the real telltale thing were all the big freaking banners. It's like, oh, let's go storm the Capitol. No, let's wait and make some huge banners that say the name of the guy who's at fault. Like,
so, but think about that for a second. Like, you had the audacity to actually make a observation. And so this is what I've been bumping up against in my life, especially, as I'm a major outlier on you name any topic. I'm pretty much that guy over in the corner that's the conspiracy nut. But here's the thing. The reason why you become a bit of a labeled as somebody who's a conspiracy guy is because when you peek behind the curtain and look at anything, there's a lot of questions that need to be answered. There's always multiple perspectives to look at things from. And I have chosen to look at the ones that have some mystery involved. And what I've noticed is that most people are scared to death to peek behind the curtain, to even kick the tires and find out what it's like. So of course I make grand assumptions based on, whatever it is that I'm diving into. And that polarizes a lot of people because they're afraid to look in one sense, or they're like, nuh-uh. That's the best scientific proof I get whenever I get into a debate. Like, for instance, I always tell people at work, I can disprove gravity, and I do it to their face over and over and over. And I've got a bunch of guys in there that are, one of them is he's getting his PhD in physics right now, and he's working as a part-time kind of like truck driver, garbage dump, sweep the parking lot, pick up trash guy while he goes to school. And he takes off middle of the day to go to his classes and, and finish his degree. And basically him and I get into these discussions where I disprove gravity. I tell him the historicity of how we came to understand gravity and all that. And he goes, well, but because he's never been told this stuff, he's never been taught the opposite of what they teach. So they teach him one thing. They start him out with Newtonian physics, and they say this dude proposed a thing way back when, and then we go on down the line. They talk about all the greats. They never talk about the dissenters. They never talk about Tesla. They never talk about the things that actually disprove all of their theories. And they just run off after theory after theory after theory. And that's what our modern education is based off in that one area. And he doesn't know the opposite. He's never looked at it. So to him, it doesn't exist. He's like, nuh-uh, nuh-uh, nuh-uh. And his thinking is so cult-like, it's mind-boggling. And so what I've had to really come to grips with is that people are under a spell, everybody, myself included. And we come to this world with so many preconceptions. And then as we grow and we learn and we dig into different issues, let's say I want to learn about anything. Let's take music. Or no, let's take foosball, because I'm a foosball player, right? I like that stupid game where you just fucking hit a little table soccer, hit a little ball around. But I got, like, for instance, I just recently got the tournament table, the professional table. It's like a $2,000. I got a good price. I had to drive all the way up to Kenmore, Washington to get it. Brought it home. And in the last 2 months of playing on that thing, my game has gone to a level I can't even comprehend. And then COVID's happening, so I can't go out and whoop everybody's ass like I want. So I'm sitting at home just like spinning my wheels, wanting to just crush people, and I can't do it because I finally reached that professional level that I wanted to get to, but I don't have anybody to play. Like, anybody in my local area, they're scared of COVID and they don't want to come over to my house to play.
What are the pro guys doing?
Same thing I'm doing. They're losing their fucking mind. Because foosball players, like any addictive person, like golfers, whatever, they need it. They got to be shoulder to shoulder. They got to be doing this stuff. Everybody's losing their shit right now. That's what's happening. And everybody's doing underground shit. They're not talking about it, but they got groups. Everybody's getting together, and it's comical. Because, I mean, foosball players, once you get hooked on it, you're an addict. But anyway, the reason why I segued there is because I have gone into that game. I built a table myself 20 some years ago. I made a foosball table with these fucking hands, played on it for 20 years, and it held me back because the table wasn't the same exact speed, table density, all that stuff was a little different. And so I would go to these tournaments and play these professionals, and basically I'd always fall short because I'd have to make up for the differences in the tables. And it's a big leap when you're playing at a professional level. These guys are machines. I mean, it sounds corny, but even people who don't play foosball, when they walk into a foosball tournament room, the air is thick. It's like really intense. And when people are playing a match, your heart gets going. Even if you don't even know what you're watching, there's a weird intensity about it. And that's a dumb, stupid bar game. That's a game you play in a tavern. Guys, they used to have ashtrays on the table. Okay, they used to make tables with ashtrays built in to them. Okay, that's how white trash this game is. Okay, and I love it because it's infinite. It's like a violin. You know, let's say some caveman picked up a violin with a bow. I mean, the possibilities are endless. That's only one thing in this world, you know. And so when you do that and you apply that back to education, I've done that. I've applied that same intensity with, well, how's the world work? Okay, what is this place we've been told? And then you dig in, you learn their model, their system, their theories, and then you test those against the actual experiences you have, and you find out they're not the same. There's Narnia, where everything is possible. It's been created, and they've got all these ideas. And in Narnia, you could do all this stuff. But in our world, we don't live in Narnia. We live in the real world. And when you try to explain to somebody who's been trained in Narnia land, i.e. modern cosmological physics, you try to explain to them anything that they're actually experiencing, like, nuh-uh, we're experiencing. Think that because you feel that. But what we've actually proven and learned is that this is how it actually works, and it's all bad.
Well, it's interesting because in a way we live in a mixture of Narnia land and I don't know, what is this thing that we're in? You know, the world of the ideal and the world of the real are constantly interacting with each other. And the thing that's strange that keeps happening over and over again is that people get some kind of an idea and they think, oh yeah, this is the shit, right? And they try to turn it into the world of the real, and they forget that it's just an idea. And that happens over and over and over again in all aspects of
Yep.
human existence. So it's a very difficult thing for people to keep it clear, like, well, where is the realm of the conceptual and how does it relate to what's physically happening here? You know, there's a relationship, but it's not the same world. Those are two different things. The realm of the being and the realm of the material.
Mm.
Now I know that's an arguable point.
It's like Feynman said.
Yeah, what did Feynman say?
So everything's arguable. Well, you remember that, and I have your book, Feynman's Lost Lecture, and it has an audio CD that comes with it, so you can listen to him talk. And I have a lot of respect for Feynman, even though I disagree with modern cosmological physics. It takes a brilliant mind to even suss out some of these concepts mathematically. But that's what's happened is you've taken a bunch of brilliant minds. They took what they thought they were seeing with the motion of the sun, moon, and stars, which clearly are moving around us, right? But then we were told, no, we can actually flip it and invert it, and we're actually the ones that are moving. And these other things, they're solid in the background, and we're the ones moving. But none of us experienced that. So they're still trying to basically erase away our experience and say, no, you don't understand, you small, infidel. How dare you actually look up and see that there's things moving above your head that you have no control over? No, that's not how it works. You're insignificant, and you're hurtling through an insignificant, massive, infinity-sized fucking thing that nobody can actually determine if there's a boundary condition to. But you're just an insignificant part of that. We're hurtling through nothingness right now. Duh. How do you not see that? And that's what they teach people. They don't teach them their actual experience. They actually have got them so far out. They've taken them so far out that now what we're up against, and I think what we're going to see in this generation, is people are going to realize that their daily experience does not match the model. And the reason why I think we're going to get there is the system doesn't work. So if the system that upholds all these theories and ideas is falling apart, then all those ideals can also be reassessed. We can reevaluate everything we've been told. We can re-educate ourselves based on our actual experience. And right now we're trapped in books. We're trapped in knowledge of authority that's come before us. So when we go to class, we learn from someone smarter than us. And because they can do circles around us mathematically, like Feynman could do, he explained to a freshman class, his lost lecture was based on the elliptical motion of the Earth and the planets around the sun. And he explained it in plane geometry, which nobody had ever been able to do simply before. He took it upon himself as a challenge to be able to explain all these heavenly motions, these really, really mathematically tough concepts. He explained them to a freshman class by using basic geometry and ellipse, basically just ellipse math, really simple stuff. So when I'm reading it, I'm like, okay, yeah, that's pretty simple. I like the way he laid it out. So then I went back and read Mathematica Principia. I read Newton's original work. And it's hilarious because if you just read the first chapter, he basically said, anybody stupid enough to believe what I'm about to lay down is a fool. And then he spends 200 pages just writing off a bunch of math. I'm not joking. Read it. The first chapter, he's like, you're literally a retard if you believe anything that comes after this statement. But if somebody is going to think that, well, we'll go this way. I'm brilliant enough. I'll do some circles around all you fools mathematically. And then when I'm done, I'll dazzle you with so much bullshit. You're going to spend the next 200-300 years trying to prove me right. And that's what we've been doing. It's like, I've told you this before. I have a friend who's a mathematician, and he said, we were driving to a martial arts seminar, and he goes, that the math that they used to get us to the moon was actually just basic Newtonian math. And I was like, and back then I didn't know what he was talking about. It's really simple math. They figured out how to do their whole supposed flight path and everything. Well, then you start looking at it and go, well, wait a minute. If they didn't go to the moon, let's just propose that maybe it's a possibility they didn't go, then that means that math might not actually work. That might not be a real place that they supposedly went to. And if that's the thing, then that all that math that's written out is just Narnia land, because it doesn't exist unless we can empirically prove it.
Well, there's a lot of
And that's
ifs.
where I've come is like, well,
There's a lot of
I've
ifs
seen
in
the chink
that.
in the arm.
You know, so yeah, I mean, who knows? But there is another thing, like the Voyager anomaly is another thing that's sometimes pointed to when they're like, well, we don't quite have this math right yet. Because okay, I mean, I guess if they didn't go to the moon, then maybe they didn't send these Voyager things out. But my sense of it is that they did. This is one of the things that we disagreed about from time to time, and you know, they had a predicted path for the Voyager spacecraft, and it didn't follow that path. So that's been one of the things pointed to from time to time, saying, hey, there's something else going on out there. But yeah, it's definitely true that lost in mathematics is a big problem, you know, because there's a sort of, like, on a very basic level, the attitude is, okay, well, because science, you know, and if anyone goes, yeah, but, and then they go, well, because math, you know, that's basically the whole thing. And math is really not, there's so many ways in which math is not the story. It just, it gets back to exactly what we were talking about before, like taking this conceptual framework as if it were real. It's just a conceptual framework. It's a description like anything else. And the description is always going to be a reduction of what's actually going on. You know, we maybe get some part of it right, but there's pieces of it that are missing, because that's what a description does, is it makes, it limits the realm so that you can understand something. And you have to do that in order to understand something. Something has to be left out of the picture, otherwise you can't understand it. And so whatever is it's left out of any particular description, that's the problem with it. So it's kind of inherent to us. I think there's a guy who actually proved that this was a problem within all mathematical systems. He points out that there's no such thing as a system that could be full, that could take account of everything. And that's right. No matter how it is you design a system, it's always going to have its faults, which just means that after a while it has to be rebuilt. And that's kind of what we're really driving at here, is that, yeah, clearly this system has some major faults. Everyone's aware of that. And so there's a lot of resistance to reconsidering some of the basics, you know, because if you get down into the no one wants to get into, you know, the transmission of the thing, you know. That's why there are guys who specialize in transmissions. You know, so if you're really getting into like the bowels of this thing, everyone's like, nah, just leave it alone. We don't want to go in there.
You know? Well, you can't.
But at a certain point, you got to.
Well, that'll happen when academia is no longer serving its purpose. When the validity leaves and people realize that to get a degree in lesbian dance theory may not be everything it's cracked up to be, right? So, like, I'm a big fan of applied sciences, material applied sciences. Those are ones that I have tremendous respect for, because if you want to build a parking garage that won't collapse upon itself, I want nerds designing and building that shit, okay? I want it to be done correctly. When it comes to things that I will never get to experience in education, like the Narnia land and all these areas that they go into, all the theories and all that stuff, it's good. It does progress our thinking on it, but I always come back to the real world. Like, what results are we getting? Right. So let's take, for instance, the sheer amount of embodied energy and of money that we spend on, let's call it military spending, let's call it space travel, all this stuff. Hundreds of billions, if not trillions, go into that. That money, if it is real, that money that's being put in there could be turned and used to actually come up with sustainable farming practices, more renewable energy for the location you live in, just finding ways to make the world generally a better place. It's actually super cheap to do compared to all that. And so that's how I kind of gauge things that have an authenticity towards making the world a better place. So that's why I'm against essentially war and the military, even though I train in a martial art that I would consider myself on a warrior path. I will not seek war. What I've learned in the 25 years of training is that a real warrior his aim is to end war, not by going out and waving flags, but to have the peace within yourself, to not promulgate more war, more struggle, more discontent. And then we see the authority above us doing the direct opposite. they're actually storming off to war all the time. And that tells me what I need to know about their system. It tells me I don't need to listen to their system, their theories. But when we come back to the applied sciences, I want to drive a car that stops when I hit the brake. Like, we need that. That's
Yeah.
super good. Right? But everything else that's all theory, I can chuck it aside and make up my own goddamn mind. And I think that that's scary for a lot of people. They don't want to go there. They don't want to examine or explore and make up their own mind. They want to just be fine with what smarter people than them have figured out.
Right. Well, God willing, there's room for all of us in this, and there'll be room for us to continue to dissent. Although it sure looks like that's not the way they want it to go. There is, I guess, in the conspiracy mindset of things, this idea that there's a breakaway civilization, and that basically, the people who have hoarded all the stuff for themselves and their minions are going to kind of shut down the rest of us, and they're going to go their own way on a separate venture. So they're really not all that interested in whether or not our car works anymore or anything like that. They're just trying to keep us busy fighting amongst ourselves while they get the final pieces in play, and then it's God knows what, but it seems like a likely scenario, when you take a look at what's going on. So that could be kind of ugly.
If I told you about my lost continent theory that I have going right now?
I don't know, but yeah, let's hear about it.
Well, here's in a nutshell, just because it's a massive topic. So I'll just throw this at you. So it's food for thought. That I'm a complete and utter psycho when it comes to what I think about so I think that not only has the Earth that we live on been misdescribed, I think that the current mapping systems that we have, the cartography and the technology we have to map the Earth, I think that there's a lot that's been left out. And so with that opens the possibility that once you start exploring how the maps have actually been made and the Earth has been laid out for us to visually see, whether it's Google Earth, whether it's navigation with ships or jets that commercially fly or military flies around. When you start looking at how we've been shown the Earth, I think that there's a bunch of missing area, and there's a possibility, and I think this from an electromagnetic standpoint, I think that we live in a quadrupole world. I think that if you really look at what the yin yang and what the Taoists, and I'm not going to speak for the Taoists, but if you look at the yin yang, essentially what you've got is this ebbing and flowing of energy that never starts or ever stops. And then you've got these two little spheres of opposing colors inside of the bulk of those two swirling energies. And I think that that's a representation of the Earth energy and the toroidal energy field that we exist in as the world that I have come to know it for myself. Now, I'm not going to tell you that you need to see it that way or anybody else, but I think that we live in a place that's absolutely electromagnetically built. Everything works off of those principles in the physical level. In the metaphysical and spiritual, I don't know how that works because I can't go there. I have ideas spiritually, but there's no way I can put them into words. But with all that, when you start looking at how the world's been laid out and then you overlay it with how the real physical world actually works, I think that there's a whole section in our probably larger, I would say, the South Atlantic / Indian Ocean. I think there's a massive chunk of land that's down there that is not on any map anywhere. And the reason why I think that is because our whole world, I think, has been misdescribed. But it actually physically works. And then if you looked at people who actually understand how to map things correctly, what you'll find is there's a lot of theories on how to map things, but there is no actual perfect way to map like a coastline to determine how big the coastline of Florida is. There's been numerous attempts to get an accurate kind of how many miles is this coastline, and you can literally have divergent numbers that are so big that it's like laugh out loud, like tens of thousands of miles in difference just because of different measuring systems. So that tells me that we're pretty poor at measuring things. But what we've been told is that no, we got satellites flying around and they're super accurate and they got everything down to an inch. They can look at a postage stamp from fucking space. I'm like, no, they can't. And then when you say that, people go, no, they can. I go, show me the evidence. And you're going to laugh out loud when you actually look for the evidence that there's something that can actually do this. And here's a little thought experiment for you because it's a topic. Do yourself a favor and go on Google Earth Okay. If you have Google Earth Pro, get the best one you can. And what I want you to do is I want you to look at Lake Tahoe, because Lake Tahoe is about 40, I want to say it's like 40 miles as far as its outer width, like length across, right? So 40 miles, let's say, at its longest points. You zoom in on it, you look at it, and then you zoom all the way out. And supposedly Google Earth, at least the model that I used, I think it went out 40,000 miles. I think it's how far out they let you zoom from Earth, right? So look at Lake Tahoe and then zoom out slowly until you can't see Lake Tahoe anymore. Okay. And then look at how far that is on Google Earth. And then what I want you to do is I want you to know that the Aristarchus crater on the moon, that's visual, you can see it with the naked eye. And also with my super zoom camera, I can zoom right in and look at it. Well, it's 40 miles wide based on the accounts of the people who said they went there. And you can see it 238,000 miles away. So something's not right. And so maybe Google Earth got it wrong and they don't represent what it really looks like to zoom away 40,000 miles. But I think that the physical reality is different than what we've been shown, and we live in a dream world. So when you test these things,
you do have an atmosphere you have an atmosphere to account for on Earth. So there's going to be, and that can change radically. So, there'll be points where you can barely see a few miles above, so I don't know to what extent that's taken into account in Google Earth, but, I think that,
well, it's just a picture. I mean, it's a cartoon.
Where we could agree on this, I think, would be that clearly the representation of things is always, like we were just discussing before, it's a system, it's a way of looking at things, and it's going to be leaving stuff out. And then, of course, there are a variety of reasons why they would want to leave other stuff out, even if it could be part of that system. So we can imagine quite easily that there, even if you're going to tell kind of a mainstream narrative and say, well, there's military bases they're going to want to leave out, right? Like, missile silos and stuff like that. But there's a whole bunch of stuff that's not going to be on there. And then, I think that really, when it comes down to it, the capture that happens in the digital domain just makes all of that so much more manipulable. So at any point, they could shift any data point in any direction they want to, if there's enough of a reason to do so.
That's right.
And so, we are living in if we're taking these things as being real, that's a real problem. But they may be still useful to some extent. And some of these systems are, kind of like the guy who knows how to put the car together, right? There's a degree of that, right? There's always a certain degree of tolerances, right? So if it's done right, some of this stuff can be laid out reasonably well, right? But there are all kinds of reasons why we're probably not getting the pure product,
Well, one of the things that you just made me think of that when I was talking about Google Earth, think of the compliance that has and the coordination that has to be set up with the militaries of the world and a tech giant.
Right.
Because who got with Google and said, well, if you're really looking down everything, you're going to see these things that we don't want you to see. Well, did China call Google up and say, hey, by the way, we don't want these to be shown? And then Russia called up? That means that Google's in bed with all the world's militaries and they're all coordinating somehow. I mean, think about that's fucked up. Like, that's some pretty deep shit.
Another way of looking at it is that they've got the information on everyone, so they're kind of like, oh yeah, we see what you're doing there. We see what you're doing there. And so in a certain sense, I think that what's really happening here is that governments don't have as much power as these gigantic tech companies. The tech companies they're the information is power, right? So they're the ones who really are running the show right now. And it's pretty obvious that everyone's always talking about, oh yeah, social media changed the election and blah, blah, blah. It's like, of course, they're the ones with the power, and they're changing the governments too. Like, I'm pretty sure that you can't sneeze in a government without these guys, giving the go ahead at this point. I don't know. I'm not sure how far it's gone yet, but I'm pretty sure that the nation state is over.
Yeah, no, I would agree 100%. Yeah, man, it's what's interesting to me. Like, if you think about it from a nuts and bolts perspective, let's say you're the guy that started Google and you got a bunch of dudes, you're a bunch of nerds and you start up Google, and then, the internet starts to build and things become you get more successful, you get more power, you start building more banks of computers all over the country to store all this information and let people's, computers work faster and the technology keeps growing. At some point, there has to be an authority that says, hey, by the way, you are basically capable of doing a massive amount of harm. Like, you can control an election, you could start a war. If Google decided to, they could just guide people down a path, and they obviously are doing that to some degree. It's not completely organic when we search things, right? It's not just honest and, oh, I'm going to Google something, and then they always give you a recommendation, and then God knows what they're actually showing you versus what may actually be there. But at what point was there a dad in the room that said, hey, actually the government's the one in charge here and you got to follow our rules? It seems like that just got left behind, and Google became I hate using the word global, but essentially a worldwide force. And now they're just daddy. Like, who's the actual authority in this? Who's the one? No, you can or can't do that. And I don't think anybody knows who's controlling this thing. Like, I don't think there is anybody.
I think they've been kind of pushed out of China to some extent. I know that they made a bunch of concessions in order to be able to operate in China, but I think in many respects what we're seeing are kind of competing AIs between Google and the Chinese at this point. I think that's kind of how it's mapping out in general. And we're having these discussions within the hallowed halls of government now about the overreach of these tech companies, but it's being framed in such a way where really what is going to happen probably is that free speech is going to be banned. That seems to be,
yes.
That's how they've managed to pretend that they're actually controlling these tech giants, when in reality what they're doing is they're giving them license to censor. So,
yeah.
Here we are.
It's a modern book burning. They're doing it. They're doing it in a really slick way. What they've done is they've figured out how to get their hooks in to the emotional body of this current generation, where everybody has feelings, everybody's ready to be offended, everybody's a victim looking for an oppressor. And unfortunately, the blowback for these woke SJWs is that the alpha males and alpha females, the ones with actual real fortitude spiritually, not just physically. I'm not saying they can punch your face in, that's kind of passe in my opinion. I know that our current society is looking like they're all riled up and ready to do violence. I think it's the opposite. I think the media is pinpointing in on a small group of idiots. They televise them, and the rest of us back are going, fuck, they're everywhere. They're not. I mean, most people don't want to do harm. There's some small group that do, but I really think that right now the alpha human, the ones who lead by example with character, with heart, with empathy and consideration for others, that's the alpha I'm talking about. I'm not talking about these weak people who think about this with the protests. Okay, no matter what side of the fence people are on with Black Lives Matter or whatever, people clearly showed up for a long period of time. That tells me two things: they got nothing else to do and they don't have a job. That's what it tells me. So I'm not against them protesting, but get a fucking job. Do something to benefit yourself and others instead of just waving a flag and saying, duh, we're stating the obvious. It's like a protest stating the obvious. It's like protests don't work. They to some point they piss people off and they maybe wave flags enough, but they always pass. Like there's a guy, and God bless him, he drives an old VW bus, and he's been standing outside of the courthouse in Corvallis since the Gulf War started. And he goes there like literally probably nights a week and just stands, waves a anti-war cardboard sign and say, basically like food, not bombs, and stuff like that. And he's down there with some old gray hair here in Corvallis, and God bless him. Yeah. Like, he really believes that that's getting, and people honk at him still to this day. No war, And I'm like, you missed the boat, bro. Like, it doesn't work. The guy I think it's a social circle for him. It's a way to just know that every week he's going to be in the same place. And
I think it's also his spiritual, he's just like, okay, I'm not going to just do nothing and I can't think of anything else to do. I remember seeing that guy out there, and every now and then some other people would join him. And it was typically, the gray hair crowd. Because, at a certain point, it's like, we're committed to these principles. And a lot of people get disillusioned for good reason, because it doesn't do a frickin' bit of good. But, there's some characters just like, I don't care. I don't care whether it does any good or not. I'm going to just stand out there and say what I feel needs to be said. On some level, I feel like that's the Assembly of Silence radio hour too. That on some level, I'm not really sure if this is going to do a freaking bit of good. Probably won't. It's not a lot of viewership and what have you. But damn it, every month I'm going to put out there something that I think is worth considering. There's a lot of stuff that's worth considering. So let's consider it. And yeah, maybe it's a losing battle and what have you. But, and I agree with you that when it comes to what people think it is that they're out there demonstrating for, quite often that's not what's going to be the result. But there's other things that can be, accomplished when large numbers of people get out into the streets. And, right now we are having, we're basically seeing the demolition of our economy. So a lot of people couldn't work even if they wanted to. On the other hand, there are some jobs that no one wants to do. So it's a very strange environment because definitely there's a lot of people who could be doing something if they wanted to, but they don't want to. So it's a very, very bizarre, and if the destruction of the economy continues, man, it's.
Well, it's uncharted territory for us. We've been living in a dream world our whole lives. Like our parents did things, they made money, and we thought that was the real system. And what we're seeing right now is a dissolution of that system, it's a controlled demolition of a system that had been propped up. And I think, like to your point, and kind of back to the lost continent theory I believe that we finally, through the fake fiat currency, they've been able to, the banksters or whoever, the old money families, the quiet ones, they basically they've gotten to the point where the technology is organically grown and been to the place where now we don't need money because the incentivization is now going to be different. They're going to change it because it never was real to begin with. The question is going to be, are we going to go kicking and screaming, or are we going to accept it? And the way that they're currently trying to get us to accept it, I'm not really down with. I don't really like the idea of an overarching control system that removes human freedom and human autonomy. That doesn't seem fun to me. But I also think, like, astrologically and spiritually, energetically right now, we're being faced with a choice. Humanity can either go to the path of letting somebody else make decisions for them, or we can grow up and say no. Because that's all it takes, is enough people just saying, no, we're not going to do that. But the problem is that we're all in a cult. We all have we've been taught belief systems that really they're like Santa Claus and Narnia. Like, really, if you think about most religions, the core teachings of them are beautiful and pure, and they help you lead a better life. But then what happens is those are control systems that are Narnia, like the story of any saint or any prophet. They're stories. They're archetypal stories that are beautiful, and they tell you something about your own journey in life. But are they actually factually true? Who cares? It's the result that matters. So when you look at the overarching control structure right now trying to bring down the economy, they don't care what the story is. They'll put any story in there they want. And so our job right now is to quit buying into these stories and live in the real world right now. Like, literally, grow food, find a clean source of water, know your neighbors. That's what's actually going to matter when the economy does whatever it's going to do. Because if we go to, like, let's say a cashless society where everybody's on a credit score, which China's obviously implemented, in some areas, I can't speak to the whole country, but they're clearly practicing this right now. That's not the world I want to live in. So I will do everything I can to not participate into that. But some people will be like, sweet, I don't have to pull my card out at the grocery store anymore. I can just scan my face. It's like,
right. We're
working towards a place where, like, right now, I have to go to work and they have to aim a thermometer at my forehead to check my temperature before I can walk into the building. That's what our owner has instituted. And you know what I feel like? And this is going to sound really fucked up, but this is how I feel. I feel like a Jew in Nazi Germany with a gun to my head. I feel like we are now, we have, instead of just shooting people in the face, we're literally demoralizing people. We're putting masks on, looking like bandits. So, I was at the grocery store I was at the mini mart buying beer, and everybody's wearing bandit masks. And I said out loud, when people were standing in line, they go, this is the only time in history where the guy not wearing a mask is a bad guy in a convenience store.
Right.
And everybody kind of laughed. And I said, dude, we are being mind fucked. Right? Like, it's not right. Something's not right, right? And so with the collapse of the economy, it's like everybody knows this isn't right. It doesn't feel right, but yet we're just kind of like going along because nobody knows what to do. So I come back to basic principles: food, water, shelter, and good humans around you. Like, that's what's actually going to liberate human beings to just live their own lives. And these systems can fall of their own weight without having destructive energies. We don't need to see riots in the street. We need to grow some food.
God
we need
willing,
to know where food actually comes from, because it doesn't come from.
Yeah, I mean, God willing, we'll have the opportunity to do something like that. We'll see. But of course, if the planet is populated with, let's say, close to 8 billion people, most people aren't going to have that opportunity. So we have to keep that in mind. And I think it's also worth bearing in mind that there's a pretty good chance that part of the reason why the United States is being taken down the way it is because we were a bubble way outside of what the average was on this planet. So, we were living a lifestyle, that was, let's say, just unfair when it came to the rest of the world. And so bringing us back in line with what's happening in the rest of the world makes sense from a global management point of view. And, yeah, don't like it, but on the other hand, I didn't like the fact that we were so flagrantly consuming and having these horrible fucking military actions that destroyed the lives of millions of people, so that we could maintain our supply chains, fossil fuel, the whole deal, like. The fact that our country thought it was okay to do that stuff, many of us didn't, so many of us were at least ethically aligned with the man standing outside in front of the courthouse still. And but we were unsuccessful at preventing what occurred. And so to some extent, we are all bearing the burden of the sins of our nation. And basically you could say, I don't think that any nation can commit unjust and immoral military action without suffering the consequences. And so it's Agreed. Like, the son suffers the consequences of the sins of the father, and it's a horrible thing. In some ways, it's really not fair, because I do believe that most Americans were against these military actions, even from the get-go. And I think, obviously, increasingly Absolutely. So as it went on, but we're like pretty much 20 years into some pretty horrible stuff. And people are talking about healthcare. You know what I mean? Like it's almost been forgotten that this is what the wealth of the nation has been poured into. And so I do think that, whatever it is that we're going to suffer, in many respects, it's deserved, particularly because supposedly we're a democracy, which in some respects, that is also what we've lost in the process. Or at least it's been pointed out to us that it really isn't one. So, you could say along the way, at every point, whenever the people had the wrong point of view, the leadership was just like, well, fuck it, we're going to do the way we wanted to do anyway. And that's just gotten more and more obvious. They just got more blatant about it.
Yeah. God, there's so many thoughts there that just passed in my brain. I think that you're 100% right? The energy has to go somewhere. So it's swinging back. We have swung our big stick long enough, and we did it pretty blindly, I think, from a spiritual perspective. When, like you said, most people sitting at home don't want to see a war. They don't want to send their sons and daughters off to a thing that doesn't have any, meat on the bones. It doesn't have any truth behind it. Like, my grandfather died this last year, in 2020, right? He's 97 years old, World War II vet. airborne guy, and to me, he's a absolute example of how to just live an upright life, be a good person, be tough as hell, get shit done, don't complain, go to work. Like, he's a man, and I love it. I love that he's the old guard. You don't see that in your day-to-day very often anymore. Somebody that actually stood up for what he actually thought. He didn't waffle, but he was intelligent enough to say, no, I was wrong on that one. I've changed my mind. He went to war. Literally, Pearl Harbor was attacked, and 7 days later, he was in a recruiting station because that was the soonest he could get to one. And then he gets in a bad car wreck, has a car roll over him because he got thrown out. The car crushed his hips, broke them all up. He was in the hospital for 6 months. The day he gets out of the hospital, he goes down to another recruiting station and signs up again. And that's when he got into the airborne.
Whoa.
This guy was bound, determined to go off to war because back then it was in the newspapers and on the radio that we were attacked. Simple. That was wrong. So we got to go do something about it. Now the landscape has changed completely. So now it's like, hey, for your college, if you just sign up in the National Guard, don't worry, the odds of you going to war are really low. Bullshit. Everybody goes. It's gotten to the point now where it's literally insane to me if you're thinking that what we've currently done with our military force is somehow justified. It's insane. It's insanity to think that.
Yep.
Like, this year has proven to me that we have to find our humanity. We've got to stand up for what we truly think is right. And if we disagree with somebody and they're pro-war, they think that, honestly, fighting for freedom and stand up for democracy while we drop bombs on innocent people in foreign countries that have shit we want, if that's somehow okay and they can justify it, well, that's their business, but it's not right. There's no way it's right. It couldn't be right. I mean, we're intelligent people. We know that there's no excuse to justify killing innocent people.
It's hard
There's
to
just
imagine.
not.
It's hard to imagine that anyone would defend that point of view unless they had something to benefit from, unless they were personally benefiting from it. It's really hard to imagine that anyone would actually defend that. In some ways, you could say that the military-industrial complex is like a parasite on the side of this country that's just sucked all the lifeblood out of it. Pretty much against the will of the people, and that our lifeblood has been sucked for that horrible parasitic thing, which the goals, maybe every now and then there's a table scrap that's thrown the way of the American people as a result of these things, but basically it's just put money in the pocket of people who already have plenty of money.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. Well, so again, and I say the lost continent theory, but really what I'm alluding to is clearly this energy, this money that is funneling to somewhere. It's not just sitting in bank accounts somewhere, right? So the richest people in the world, the multi-billionaires, the trillionaires, the banksters, all that. So where is this energy actually going? Is it sitting in a bank account, or is it actually building something? So I think, like you say, if there was a breakaway civilization or something, because they know that there's something coming that's going to be tough to deal with, call it cataclysm, call it the great cycle. This earth works in cataclysmic cycles. Maybe there is something big, within the next 100 years that they've been really trying to preserve their family lines and protect the best they can. And they figured out you can't do that overtly. You can't just build a castle on top of the hill because they can see you up there. They'll run up and they'll get you. So my lost continent theory goes to that, where maybe there's just a place that people have already gone or visit and go to. And maybe that's why all that energy has flowed up to that, to build something that we're not even conscious of. I don't know.
There's all these rumors about shit happening in at the South Pole. Is it the South Pole? Is it Antarctica or is it the North Pole? I think it's the South Pole. I think it's Antarctica. There's rumors of, like probably every president except Trump got brought down there for some reason or another. Like, there's some kind of activity happening. Who knows? I have no clue, but I've heard these rumors. Maybe, who knows? Maybe and there was like a breakaway civilization that started 50, 60 years ago or something like that. That's all fully developed, ready to go, and they're just kind of getting their flying saucers ready and what have you. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it could be.
Well, think about whenever a really famous celebrity commits suicide. I've had this theory, and I don't think it's correct. It's just I have to entertain it. Every once in a while, like the 27 Club, right? I think some of these guys are like, you're too talented. Get on down here. Like, we got a little spot for you down here. We're just going to go ahead and erase you, and you're going to kick it down here. And you can, like, Jimmy could play the rest of his career just jamming for these super dope people that let him live in paradise, but he has to give up his earthly world here where he's known and he's famous, but he goes to the real world, the place where they've solved all the problems. There is no money. There's just hookers and blow everywhere. It's awesome, you know? And so I say that crassly because I know it's not true, but if you don't even entertain the idea that there's a possibility that there's things we don't know, then we're going to accept everything at face value. We're going to accept what the media shows us as the real world.
Yeah, it's kind of like everything else, you know. Ultimately, it's anyone's guess. Like, we don't know when it comes to these things. We don't know. Certainly possible. I go with you on that.
Yeah, I think it's a dumb idea, but it still crosses my mind from time to time when I see like somebody that I really liked watching in a movie. Let's say, Robin Williams, take that. Like, to me, a lot of fun. I thought he brought a lot of light in the world, and then to find out that he committed suicide bothers me. So then I say, well, maybe he's not dead. Maybe he's just someplace else where he could actually, you know, in the breakaway, he's in that other world. But no, he probably just hung himself, right? That's probably what happened.
Mm-hmm.
But the media seems to have everything so prepackaged. I don't know what to believe anymore at all.
Yeah.
I think that back to politics real quick. I think Trump was the best thing that's ever happened to us in our lifetime, because he showed everybody that this is just a shit show reality TV show and it's not real. And that's why everybody got so riled up, is because we are holding on to this thing like it's real. And he came in and showed everybody, I'm an idiot and I'm going to fucking ruin everything. And you're going to go kicking and screaming. But he exposed everything without even knowing. He was the fool, and he exposed everything. So now we see that it's all fake. We see that everything's bullshit because he was bullshit. And he ran the country. I mean, it's so mind-blowing to me how polarizing he made it for people. I live in a community, I'm a liberal Democrat because I live with a bunch of liberal Democrats. That's where everybody is down here. They don't realize that I'm a libertarian that doesn't believe in politics. I just want the government to get the fuck out of my business. And I just laugh when people are like, red team, blue team, back and forth. I see these peaceful little hobbit kind of people in Corvallis get red in the face when they hear anything that Trump has said. They're ready to be violent. And I'm like, that's how polarizing these people are, or how polarized people have been. I'm like, that's not the real world, man. You know, it's a game. You're at a sporting event, and they have a scoreboard up there, and you're just sitting on the edge of your seat hoping that your team scores. That's what politics is. That's all it is. It's a show. There's real power, real effects, but it's just a
K-Fab.
Yeah. Breads and circuses.
Yep. Professional wrestling, man.
Yeah. Breads and circuses. Professional wrestling is actually way better than politics because it actually shuts off. It runs for 3 hours and then it shuts off for a week. You know, I mean, that's the way they should do politics, is just show us a little bit and then get the fuck away. We'll see you next week at the same time.
Well, I can't think of a better way to wrap about an awesome hour of conversation, man. That was fucking beautiful.
Well, so we went all over the place, and I apologize to everybody who listens to this, and I apologize to you for eating a bunch of mushrooms and going to bed way too late and not being coherent. The next time we talk, I say I'll be way more coherent, and we can actually have a train of thought and pick some topics instead of just me listening to ramble. So I apologize for that.
No, dude, no apologies are necessary at all.
I would actually like to, if we do something in the future, even if we just talk on the phone, I would like to hit some just topics. Okay. So like we pick a bullet point and then we just wrap right off of that. So that way it's less stream of conscious and more stays topical to something. That way there is an actual title you could put on the podcast.
Oh, I'll find a title,
like
man. I mean, yeah, the titles are no problem. Okay. I like the freewheeling thing. That's most of the stuff I do is totally freewheeling. It goes all over the place, and that's the way I like it, because let's face it, one thing leads to another, you know, and when you're describing things and trying to like isolate them off into their own little domain and really drill down on it, you're ignoring all that other shit that could fly off and bring you somewhere else. And in some ways, you know, the mind really is something that is connected in this very three-dimensional way, where it goes from here to here to here to here. And that's the best way of kind of getting some kind of a grip of what's going on. So I love it this way. And I thought that everything you said was beautiful, even though there's a few things I disagree with. That's the way it always is. And I love you, man. Thanks for coming on. And I hope we'll do this again. I'll let you know when it's up there. If you have topics that you want to drill down on, keep a list, send them to me. I'll keep them in a file and we can do that and see what that's like. But this was beautiful, man. And I think you should call back your friend. And it's awesome to see you. And thanks for doing this. Real pleasure.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, and much love to you. And yeah, next time I'll be a little bit more coherent.
You were pretty.
How's
You were pretty
I'll do my
fucking coherent, dude. You were pretty coherent. It was great.
All right, brother. Thanks
All right.
for having me. I appreciate it.
Love you, man. It's
Peace.
great to see you.
Love you too, man. You too.
Thanks for listening. We look forward to serving you again soon. In the meantime, remember, turn that thing over a few times before you pick it up and take it home.